Through you, Mr. Mayor, it is 5:30 p.m. and the live stream has commenced. You may begin your meeting.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Clerk. Good afternoon, Council. Good afternoon, town staff, and any residents that are observing this afternoon. I see we have quorum, so I declare this meeting in session. It's a public meeting under the Planning Act, Monday, December 12th at 5:30 p.m. As we usually do at this time, we have a councillor read the land recognition statement, and tonight it will be Councillor Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We begin this meeting by acknowledging the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe people, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the One Dish, One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and acknowledge this reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of the Indigenous people.
Thank you, Councillor Olson. And now I turn to the Deputy Clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I do have some opening remarks. I'd kindly ask Ms. Wilford to share her screen. Public meeting under the Planning Act, Monday, December 12th, 2022 at 5:30 p.m. All Town of Pelham in-person public meetings have been canceled. Instead, the town is holding all meetings electronically via Zoom. Please note that no decisions have been made prior to this public meeting. The Planning Department will be providing a presentation regarding the subject application. Participants are reminded, please ensure your background is free from offensive or vulgar material. If inappropriate material is visible, you will be removed from the meeting. Vulgar or offensive language will not be tolerated. If inappropriate language is used, you will be removed from the meeting. Participants will remain in the waiting room until they are called to speak. Once your comments have been heard by council, you will be placed back into the waiting room where you may continue to view the meeting. Please note that the Zoom chat is not monitored nor recommended to contact the Clerk's Department during this meeting. Please contact us using the email clerks@pelham.ca. This email address is being monitored during the meeting. Decorum. The public meeting under the Planning Act is a formal public hearing requiring decorum. This means that all comments are to be made through the chair. If you have pre-registered to speak, you'll be given the opportunity to address council at the public portion of the meeting. If you are live streaming and wish to submit a comment live, please email clerks@pelham.ca. Please note that comments must be received during the public portion of the meeting, otherwise they will not be considered. Disrespectful comments will also not be tolerated. Please note that if decorum is lost, the meeting may be recessed and persons will be asked to leave. Public portion of the meeting. To allow for an efficient meeting, each member of the public will be given the opportunity to speak to council during the public portion of the meeting. Please note, after all members of the public have been given the opportunity to speak to the applicant or agent will have the opportunity to address the comments and concerns at one time. Please note that all comments stated and received electronically form part of the public record and will be considered by planning staff when preparing their recommendation report for council's consideration. If you wish to receive a copy of the notice of decision, please contact the planner responsible for the application in writing as soon as possible. The contact information is to follow the presentation. Contact information can also be found on the Town of Pelham's website. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That brings us to item 2, being adoption of the agenda. I have a motion put forth by Councillor Olson that the agenda for the December 12th, 2022 public meeting under the Planning Act, special meeting of Committee of the Whole, be adopted as circulated. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Thank you. Any discussion from any member of council on this motion? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk.
Thank you. For the vote, I will begin with Councillor Eckert.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kerr.
Yes.
Councillor Nisnik.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, and that carries. Through Mr. Mayor, that brings us to item number 3, being disclosure of pecuniary interest.
Thank you. After viewing the agenda, does any counselor have a disclosure of pecuniary interest or general nature thereof? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, I've so noted. Mr. Mayor, that brings us to item number 4, and I will now read the notice requirements into the record. Town of Pelham application for zoning bylaw amendment, 1114 Hayes Street, file number AM-08-2022. Zoning bylaw amendment to reduce the rear yard setbacks for future single detached lots in the Emerald Trail draft plan of subdivision. The Planning Act requires under Section 34 that council must hold at least one public meeting for informing the public in respect to the proposed amendment. This public meeting has been called to satisfy this requirement. Notice of this meeting was provided by prepaid first-class mail to all persons who are listed as owners in the last revised assessment roll within 120 meters of the subject property on November 18, 2022. The notice provided information on the property and the proposed amendment. In addition to providing information, we will also receive any comments which any member of the public may wish to offer. If you wish to receive a copy of the notice of decision, please contact the clerk in writing as soon as possible. Contact information is available on the Town of Pelham's website and will also be displayed on the last slide of the staff presentation to follow shortly. If a person or public body would otherwise have an ability to appeal the decision of the Town of Pelham to the Ontario Land Tribunal, but they do not make oral submissions at the public meeting or make written submissions to the Town of Pelham before the bylaw is passed, they are not entitled to appeal the decision. In closing, we stress that at this point, no decision has been made on the proposed amendments, and therefore any comments received will be considered by council. Mr. Mayor, that does bring us to the planning report, and we do have planner Shannon LaRocque with us this evening for the presentation.
Okay. Ms. Locke, you have the floor.
That sounds good. Yeah, I'm just starting my meeting. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, and any members of the public that may be watching. This public meeting tonight is for property known as 1114 Hayes Street, and the application is a zoning bylaw amendment. This property is the former location of the arena, which was of course declared surplus by the town and sold to the current owner. And in February of this year, this property was given draft plan approval for a subdivision known as Emerald Trail Subdivision. Property is located on the west side of Hayes Street, north of Welland Road. And this application proposes to rezone just a portion of the lands, which is equal to lots 1 to 7 on the Emerald Trail draft plan of subdivision. The application requests a reduction to the rear yard down to 7.5 meters from the existing 10-meter rear yard setback requirement. And it also allows an encroachment of the covered porches 3.5 meters into the rear yard. This is the Emerald Trail draft plan of subdivision for some who may not be familiar with it. It proposes a looping road, and blocks 9 and 8 are proposed for townhouses. Lots 1 through 7, which are subject to this application tonight, are located here in the southern portion. In terms of the planning policy framework, this property is located within a settlement area in the provincial policy statement and within the delineated built-up area in the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. Both of those areas are intended for redevelopment and intensification. A mix of different housing types are to be provided, and good use of existing services is intended. The Niagara Region's new official plan also designates this property as delineated built-up area. This designation requires a range and mix of densities, lot and unit sizes, as well as housing types that are planned to meet housing needs for all stages of life. And in the town of Pelham, there is a 25% annual intensification rate for new residential units. So the goal is that we have at least 25% of all new residential units located within these areas each year. And residential development is encouraged to incorporate sustainability into its design and construction. The town's official plan designates this property as urban living area, and there's a special policy that applies to these lands. Special policy still reflects the previous municipal address, so 1120 Hay Street, special policy area. The policies in this area refer to B1113 in the official plan, and those policies include urban design requirements for the built form so that high quality construction and design can be ensured. They also have policies around parkland and public space, including street trees, lighting, sidewalks, requirement to maintain the wooded area in the park, and also to provide a future pedestrian trail connecting to Welland Road. There's also a requirement for public parking areas to access the park and on-street parking in the subdivision. The town's zoning bylaw 1136, 1987 zones the portion of this property that relates to these 7 lots, R2 284, which permits one single detached dwelling, as well as accessory buildings and uses, so your garage and sheds and decks and things like that. These lots are subject to special regulations. And the special regulations that are being requested to change tonight relate to the minimum rear yard. The standard requirement is 10 meters in this zone. The requested reduction is down to 7.5 meters. And also the allowance for covered porches in the rear yard. Typically, they would be allowed to encroach 1.5 meters into the yard. The request is to allow them to go 3.5 meters into the rear yard, resulting in a 4-meter setback from that rear lot line. And for council's information, zoning bylaw 4481, 2022, which was approved in August of this year, and is currently under appeal and so not in effect. But just for information purposes, these lands are zoned residential 2-89, which carries forward the requirements of the R2 284 zone from the 1987 bylaw. This application was circulated to town departments and also to members of the public within 120 meters of the property. And these comments are what was received from Town Public Works. There were no comments or concerns. And we did receive one comment from a member of the public. Ron Lynch provided comments that he's opposed to the application because the property sits at a higher elevation than the neighboring properties, with decks that will impact privacy and continued enjoyment of the backyard. A planning justification brief was also provided with this application. That brief was prepared by Cortec and dated October 2022. If anyone wishes a copy of that report, they're welcome to contact me and I can provide a copy. My contact information is on the final slide of this report, of this presentation. And as stated by the clerk earlier, there are no decisions or recommendations being made tonight. Once all of the comments have been received, then planning staff will consider them and prepare a recommendation report for council's consideration at a future meeting. If anyone wishes to receive future notices or a future notice of what council's decision is on this application, please contact me. And I can be contacted through email, slarock@pelham.ca, or at extension 319 at the town. And
Good.
That concludes my presentation.
Okay, thank you, Ms. LaRocque, for your presentation. I turn to the clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we do have the agent, Mrs. Susan Smythe, with us, as well as the applicant, John Lally, and the project coordinator, Cam Land. And I do believe that Ms. Smythe has a presentation for you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Smythe, you have the floor.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I'm just going to try to share my screen. Just please bear with me. Can you see anything yet?
No.
If you would like, Ms. Smythe, I can have our staff share your presentation.
Yes, please, because for some reason, I don't know on the Zoom, I don't have the permissions to share my screen.
Okay, not a problem.
Thank you very much. So, good evening, Mr. Chair, Mayor, members of council, and those in the public attending this evening. I do want to thank your time for joining us and again, receiving the information as Mrs. LaRocque had indicated about the application for the amendment to the zoning bylaw. Again, more specifically, it's dealing with the site-specific bylaw number 4014 as it pertains to R2 284. That is geared for those single detached lots. Again, the requested changes are for the minimum rear yard and encroachment into the rear yard for the decks and patios. However, there will be some further discussions that will be addressed by Mr. Lally separately that will be pertaining to a request for an increased lot coverage. So again, my name is Susan Smythe. I am a senior planner here with Portec. I have been actually in front of council last year, almost around the same time, which was for the request for the approval of the draft plan as Emerald Trails. So now I am going to just briefly provide an overview. Mrs. LaRocque provided a great presentation, so I'm just going to kind of highlight on a couple details. Next slide, please. Thank you. So again, as Mrs. LaRocque indicated, it is the site that we're talking about is a former arena located on the west side of Hay Street, north of Welland Road. The main entrance will be from Hay Street, which will lead on to Accursi Crescent, which is the public road that was named in honor of Mr. Gary Accursi, who is a former town councillor from 2010 to 2018. The site is approximately 1.59 hectares in size. The developer did acquire the lands from the town back in September of 2019, pretty much around the same time or shortly thereafter the demolition of the arena. At the time of the purchase of the land, the original 2018 approved concept identified 41 units for this development. When Mr. Lally acquired the lands, he reviewed the site and he decided to reduce the number of units such that the development would be a little more compatible with the surrounding area, provide for better drainage, offer some opportunities for larger unit sizes, better parking, and more landscape elements. You can change the slide, please. Thank you. So again, as I indicated, we are here to only speak to the matter of the site-specific bylaw R2284 that deals primarily with the these 7 single lots. So just to kind of give a little bit of insight here to show you what these images reflect. So to the right of the presentation is the overall draft plan. That shows the 7 single detached lots. The image to the bottom is to show, that's highlighted in red, is to show a delineation of land area that was subject to titles absolute. So prior to any registration of a subdivision and or redevelopment of lands, there is what's called titles absolute. So essentially what that means is a title search to ensure that there is no land claims or indifferences in ownership. The title absolute notice was served to all the abutting owners in July of 2022. Mr. Lally did receive 3 objections from the landowners to the south on Welland Road. They've claimed that this new subdivision would encroach onto their lands that they have maintained and have a fence and a tree line since 1975, so over 47 years. The total land claim area is approximately 145.8 square meters, so 1570 square feet. And affects the lots 1 through to 6 primarily. To avoid the dispute, Mr. Lally did agree to transfer those lands to those adjoining owners to the south in return for their support for the proposed zoning amendment that's being presented this evening. We do have received letters from the owners, Mr. and Mrs. Glennie, located at 167 Welland Road, as well as from Miss Bates, who is located at 169 Welland Road, indicating support of the proposed amendments with the agreed transfer of the land. These letters can be made available to planning staff as well. Next slide, please. So this slide essentially is just providing the site-specific bylaw R2-284. Again, it deals with that area with the yellow and black hatch lines. There are a number of specific provisions, and primarily the provisions we are seeking a request for changes, again, is provision E, the minimum rear yard. So there is the requirement that's been identified for the 10 meters for those backing onto an existing residential property. And that's how that pertains to this. So what we're essentially requesting is that it's 7.5 meters. The other request that we're requesting for an amendment is the encroachment. And again, that deals with the encroachment into the rear yard. Thank you. Next slide. So this bylaw, as I indicated, the requested bylaw amendments, again, I identified to the site specific, but also to the residential R2 zone in the new bylaw, which Mrs. LaRocque had indicated that it's not yet currently all in effect. However, what I do want to make mention is the request for the rear yard is consistent with the R2 zone, being 7.5 meters for a rear yard. In terms of the encroachment, the 3.5 meters, that does pertain to the patio that projects into the rear yard. And that, again, is with those being above approximately 4 feet from the ground. There is images, a typical rendering of the type of units that would be constructed in these locations. Obviously, there'll be some variations amongst the 7 lots, but primarily they will be dedicated towards having a double garage, bungalow style, which is something that was identified as being a requirement, a single story, 1.5 story along these lots. And then just underneath that image is just essentially the ground floor typical layout. If you can please refer to the next image. Thank you. So this slide here essentially identifies the lines for the actual setback requirements, and the dotted green lines are identifying the encroachment limits for either a porch and or deck. So here we've applied a standard outline of the units. Again, there may be variation. You can see that the blue line represents the 4.5 meter setback to the front, with the 1.5 encroachment, again, of the front porch that could go up to that limit. The orange line represents the requested 7.5 meter rear yard setback. So that is the limit to where the house can essentially approach. And then beyond that is that dashed green line, where is the 3.5 meter encroachment. So that's with the covered deck and patio. As you can see, there is the skew because of the land claim, where it's not, a straight line across. And because of that, you can see that there is a variation between lots 1 through 7, where lots 1, 2, and 3 are pretty restrictive in terms of where the house and reach the limit of the 7.5 meter, but it kind of increases as you reach lots 5, 6, and 7. So there's a little bit of wiggle room there to enlarge the house type. However, with saying that, if you can maximize the full usage of the land area, it would then spill over the maximum 50% lot coverage that is required right now. Consequently, Mr. Lally would like to request for an increase of the lot coverage to fully utilize the lands to 55%. And he will be speaking to that matter after my presentation. Next slide, please. Again, as Mrs. LaRocque indicated, in terms of any application coming before you, there's a request or a requirement to evaluate against provincial, regional, and local policies. And in this regard, the proposal is an appropriate scale for a residential infill. It does meet the policies as it pertains to redevelopment for residential intensification within urban settlement areas. It also provides an opportunity to utilize existing municipal infrastructure, and therefore it is consistent with the policies. Next slide, please. This slide just essentially represents next steps, where we hope to go after this meeting. So this is the statutory public meeting. We're here to offer the information about the amendments. We're here to address any public or council questions and concerns. Following that, we're hoping that the town planning staff will be in a position to prepare a recommendation report. The new draft bylaw will be presented to council again. And following pending approval, there will be the 20-day appeal period. Following that, actually, I should say concurrently, we are working towards clearing the conditions of draft plan approval such that we can construct at least site works in the new year. We will then also be working with planning staff to get all the final approvals and to register the subdivision agreement and apply for building permits for the homes. That concludes my presentation. Thank you very much. And I think maybe Mr. Lally may want to address a couple other points, and then we can be available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation, Ms. Smythe. Madam Clerk, will we now hear from Mr. Lally?
Sure.
Okay, Mr. Lally, you have the floor.
Good evening, and thank you everybody for your time tonight. I just want to say we are very, very close to getting this wonderful project underway, and there's just a few little things we need to address tonight, and I'm hoping council can support us in these items. So one thing Susan did mention is we went down from 41 to 23 units from when I first purchased this property to really respect the neighbors in the neighborhood. And I think everybody will agree making a bungalow community fit tonight is certainly what everybody from day one has envisioned here. And to do that in the back 7 lots, I do need to go to 55% lot coverage. And there was a letter I just was seeing in the presentation tonight about privacy. Well, this is why we're doing it, so that I can build. Right now I'm zoned R2 to build a 2-story, and I can have an upper balcony off the 2nd story overlooking everybody's backyards. But that's not what the neighbors want. So I'm not sure why that letter wouldn't be in support to say, to have privacy, please give Mr. Lally 55% lot coverage and these encroachments so that we can build a very classy bungalow like the 3 we have built on Hay Street. The 3 I built on Hay Street are 2,500 square feet. Even at this, the 55 and the setbacks, my bungalow, I've gone down to 2,100 square feet. If I have to go lower, it's going to force me into a 2-story, which is what nobody wants that I've spoken to. So I'm asking you tonight to please support, and I guess the words I have to use are you instruct planning to let me go to 55%. The 7.5 meter setback is what's in your zoning now for 2022. And the encroachment of 3.5, I wanted 3.7, I went down to 3.5. So I've worked with the community. I've worked with everybody. I don't think this is much to ask so that we can get shovels in the ground and get this subdivision underway. In getting my subdivision agreement done, there is one thing I would like to bring up, and that is the 3 landowners in the back. And Mrs. Bates, who's 94 and just a wonderful woman, is in full support of what I'm doing here and has signed a letter with the other landowners that that's what they want here. That's what they want to see to build. The people that this affects, that's what they want. And she also does not want me to put a wooden fence along the back because there's a chain link fence, and she's built beautiful cedar tree fences that are about 15 feet high, cedar trees. And if I put a wooden fence, the sun, which goes across there all day, is going to heat up the cedar trees to a temperature that will probably kill them. So the land I bought from the city actually goes to her cedar trees, but I'm moving back 10 feet. I'm giving her the land, but we would just like to keep the chain link fence that's there now. And then hopefully the people who down the road buy these 7 bungalows, they will, you know, put cedar trees in front of the fence too, because wooden fences are great in certain circumstances. But when you have a beautiful cedar wall that somebody planted 15 years ago, we would like to maintain that. So that's just one thing in the subdivision agreement. Maybe we could remove that. And then the other 2 items Susan mentioned in the 55% lot coverage are the things I can hope that we can advise planning staff to do. I believe that's all I have to say. I would like to thank the community very much. I'd like to thank council and planning staff very much. It's been a very long road, not easy to say the least, but I think we are at a position where, as far as I was concerned, everybody seemed to be happy. So I'm hoping you can support me and move forward with this application. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lally. I'll turn to the clerk.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. That does bring us to the public input portion. I can confirm that we have no pre-registered members of the public for this application. However, we have received an email to the clerks@pelham.ca email address. Ms. Susan Buckingham, the significantly lower elevation of our property in relation to the subdivision to the rear of us will mean that the decks of the new homes could sit at the level of the top of the rear fence. Any increase in the building closer to the fence will increase the negative impact on privacy for both us and the new homeowners. Mr. Mayor, it is 6:02 p.m. and we've received no further emails. Therefore, if you'd like to close the public portion and move to...
Yes, of course. Oh, okay, so now we're going to committee. Yep. Okay, excellent. So the public input is over, and we will now turn to committee. So any comments, questions from members of council at this time? Councilor Nesnick.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Just a couple clarification questions, if anything. So wondering if the 55% increase to lot coverage, does that include the porch, or is that just the house proper? That's one question.
That includes the rear covered deck, because that's how the province does it. And that is one thing in a community I'm finding now, with a senior community or even younger family community, they like to have that rear covered deck off the back of their bungalow. I have them on the 3 houses we built here in Haste, and almost every new home has it now, but it does count as lot coverage.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome, thank you.
And second question, so those blocks that, you know, the little V where the chain link fence is, and the families on Welland Road had kind of encroached, I guess, on town property for all those years, so that you have given them, so that, has that legally been transferred, that land title, over to the properties on Welland Road?
The lawyers have done a undertaking to do that, to give it to them. So they each have counsel, I have counsel, and they've all worked well together. So it's not been transferred yet, but they've written letters to undertake to do that for them.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and just one other small point. So when I did buy the land from the city and we started all the home designs, I was under the 50%. I was under the 7.5. But when this came to our attention 6 months ago, that's why then now I've had to come back and ask for this. Okay, so we didn't really do it on purpose. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Lally.
Thank you.
Council Nesnick, those are your questions?
Yes, it has. Thank you. I'm finished.
Okay, thank you. Any other members of council? Council Hildebrand? You're on mute. Oh, there you go. Good.
I'd like to thank the presenters tonight for the information they've provided. I did take a tour of the homes along Haste with Mr. Lally and looked at the homes that he's built there, which have a porch and a deck similar to what he's demonstrating in his plans. The topography in Pelham causes these issues because when you get sloping and hills, every one of us have that same issue. The homes that were created in Braden Way and Emily Court just recently all have the same issue. Lot of the same setbacks, same elevations. Even the older streets, even where I live on Darby Lane or Edward, all those streets in Beckett, they have the same issue. You know, you walk in the front of our houses, you have 2 steps going in the back you have an 8-foot raised deck, mainly because that's the slope of the land. I understand the concern from the residents, but considering that they're not going 2 stories, I think this is a much better option. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Any other questions, comments from any other member of council? Not seen any. Madam Clerk?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. That does bring us to the presentation of resolutions. I have a motion put forth by Councillor Nisnik that committee receive report 2022-286 for information as it pertains to file number AM-08-2022, and that committee direct planning staff to prepare the recommendation report on this topic for council's consideration. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Okay, any further discussion on this resolution from any member of council? Not seen any, Madam Clerk?
Thank you. For the vote, I will begin with Councillor Hildebrand.
Yes.
Councillor Kerr.
Yes.
Councillor Nisnik.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Eckert. Councillor Eckert, I believe you are muted.
Councillor Eckert, are you there? The clerk is going to try to contact him.
Yes, I believe the clerk has sent him an invitation to remove his mute.
I could vote for him. Just kidding. Just kidding.
That's okay. I will allow the clerk a moment to connect with Councillor. Okay, I believe she is working with the councillor to get reconnected. So, Mayor Junkin, I will move on to yourself.
Okay, yes.
Thank you, and that carries.
Hello.
Oh,
Oh, excellent.
go ahead.
It wasn't responding to my delicate touch, so I'm voting yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor.
Excellent, and that carries, Mr. Mayor. That brings us to our next motion, moved by Councillor Hildebrand. That committee received the applicant's presentation for information. To Mr. Mayor for discussion.
Any discussion from members of council on this motion? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk?
Thank you. For the vote, I will begin with Councillor Kerr.
Yes.
Councillor Nisnik.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Eckert. Councillor Eckert, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. And your vote?
Yes.
Thank you. And Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Thank you. That carries. Oh, sorry, Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you. My apologies. Mr. Mayor, I have a motion put forth by Councillor Kerr that committee receive the written correspondence as listed on the agenda, and that committee receive the email correspondence to the clerks@pelham.ca email address. To Mr. Mayor for discussion.
Thank you. Any other any member of council have any discussion on this motion? Not seeing any, Madam Deputy Clerk?
Thank you. For the vote, I will begin with Councillor Niznik,
Yes.
Councillor Olson,
Yes.
Councillor Wink,
Yes.
Councillor Eckhart,
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt,
Yes.
Yes.
Councillor Kerr,
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, and that carries. Mr. Mayor, that does bring us to adjournment. I have a motion put forth by Councillor Wink that this special committee of the whole public meeting under the Planning Act be adjourned. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Okay. Any discussion on this adjournment? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk. And before we take the vote, let me just say to Mr. Lally, it looks like this has gone through, and you'll have your amendments, and we look forward to your subdivision moving forward.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to planning staff.
Great, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to clarify, the motion on the floor is that this special committee of the whole public meeting under the Planning Act be adjourned. For the vote, I will begin with Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Wink,
Yes.
Councillor Eckhart, I believe there is a slight delay. Councillor Eckhart, can you hear me? We will allow him a moment. Councillor Hildebrandt?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you, Councillor Kerr
Yes.
and Councillor Niznik.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, and that carries. I do believe I did hear Councillor Eckhart respond.
I
Excellent. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, it is 6:12 p.m. and you may gavel at your meeting.
Okay, thank you. Council, good night, and have a good evening.
Good night.